I'm reading from the New Living Translation, Hebrews 11, 8 through 12. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going, and even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner living in tents. And so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. It was by faith that even Sarah was able to have a child, though she was barren and was too old. She believed that God would keep his promise.
I want to go ahead and do this. A few weeks ago, I shared with you that part of our mission relates to this facility. This facility is not our mission, but reaching people for Jesus and sharing his hope and freedom is our mission, and this facility is a part of that. When you walk in, you get impressions of the building, which gives you impressions of the church, which gives you impressions of other things. So one of the things that we were doing and planning for the next month is to make some updates, some really needed updates, especially in that wing of the room. And I've been talking about this for a few weeks, so I just want to bring one more update with that. We've done a few meetings and leadership meetings, and we did another meeting on Monday where 20 or so people walked through that area and said, wow, this was a real eye-opening thing. I haven't been in that hallway in a long time. We really need to paint. So I also told you next Sunday we'll be taking a special donation if you want to give to that. And at the end of that, there's a pledge card on the back of your bulletin. You'll get the real thing next week, but that'll let you look at it. Right now, I also told you I'd be the first person to give to that, so that's what I'm doing right now on my phone. I hope my session didn't time out. Worked. $50,000 just deposited. In that. But don't let that hold you back from giving. We still need more. You know, one of the things that people say a lot about churches as a criticism is all you ever do is ask for money and you just want my money. That's really, really not true. I want you more than your money at any time. We can't get away from the fact that our money really speaks about our heart. And so next week, as we look to giving, you'll see the way the pledge card is written out, the building update. If you do it online, it's the building update category. If you feel like you would like to do this, or if God nudges you to do that, great. If you don't, nobody will check up on you. There's no pressure and no guilt. So please feel extremely free. And if you do give joyfully, or don't give at all. We looked at some estimates, and about $7,000 will get us painted, and another $9,000 will get us carpeted. So whatever we do, we'll be able to do, and we'll be grateful for that next week. Those pledge cards are also written so that if you want to do a little bit over the course of months, you can do that too. But it's only through the end of the year. I don't want anybody making commitments that last beyond December and feeling a sense of indebtedness to this. This is just a nice opportunity to take a step up that will help in our building. We've been talking about corporate vision, our church-wide vision. Sometimes church, it's like a herd of cats, you know? We just have our own way. We all want to go, and to get everybody going in the same direction sometimes really takes a miracle. And that's okay, because God is at the head of this thing. He can do that kind of thing. Getting all the cats to chase the same mouse, that's great. And when we can do that, when we have a vision, that sort of compels us forward as a group. It helps us work together as a team. It helps us step over challenges and barriers. It helps us take steps that we wouldn't otherwise take. Churches need that kind of vision. Churches need vision as much as they need a building. Well, more. Churches need a vision as much as they need a pastor. Churches need vision as much as they need finances. It's a really important aspect of how God moves us forward. Somebody asked me this week, well, what's the vision of the church? Where is the church going? They didn't say vision. They said, where's the church going? Great question. Isn't that on your mind? Don't you want to do more than just like the cycle of Sundays? My church is just a cycle of this is our programmatic expectation. This is what we do. We want to go somewhere. We want to be called to something that God is doing. In the scriptures, he called people to new territory, literally taking new ground. And in the kingdom sense, we talk about taking new ground, moving forward. That's a really exciting thing. And it also is a little bit scary, especially when it comes to actually stepping. It's easy to get fired up. It's much harder to get someone moving. God, I think he does this for churches all the time, and sometimes the seed never takes hold, and it never takes root, and it never grows, and it becomes a cycle of Sundays. God gives a gift when he plants a dream into the fertile soil of our hearts, and then we water it through faith and watch it grow through time. What he is planting inside of us is something that it's a God-like kind of dream. God's kind of dreams. If you ever wonder, well, what's the difference between my dreams that I have for my life or something that God put in my life? I'm not sure how to tell the difference. Well, one easy way to say the difference is a God-given dream will always make the world a better place. It'll always help other people. So oftentimes our dreams are really about making our lives a better place. And sometimes it really has nothing to do with the blessing flowing outward. God's dreams always have the blessing flowing outward, and we get blessed in the process. I think another indicator of if it's a dream from God is this. It is beyond you. When God plants a dream in your heart, you might think, no way. I must have eaten some bad cheese because that is not possible. Now we're on the right track. If you want to take notes today, there are 3 words that I'm going to share over the course of 3 different scripture verses, and we're going to look at God-given kinds of dreams. If you want to write them down, the first word is grander blank. Second word is longer blank. See, the blanks will keep you anticipating. If I gave you all the words now, you would check out. And then grander blank, longer blank, greater blank. Okay? Hold fast to dreams, Langston Hughes says. For if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field, frozen with snow. If God has given a dream, what a great gift to shelter and develop. 3 heroes from the Old Testament had been given promises from God that were extremely far out of their reach, extremely far beyond them. And each of them learned significant lessons about how to walk with God when he is given something. He's given a promise that has not yet come to pass, and it actually seemed impossible. In almost every direction you look at it, you just think, well, this seems impossible. We're going to look at 3 of those heroes of the Old Testament, and part of what makes that dream a God-given reality. So the first one is Abraham. We're going to show a verse on the screen here, and you can look at that. But as you look at it, I'm going to read it in a moment. I want to give you some background context to this verse. Abraham is, in some senses, the father of this dream that God is now birthing into the earth. His descendant, Joseph, is usually known as the dreamer, but God planted this huge global dream in Abraham's heart when he said, I am going to make you the father of a great nation. You will be blessed, and you and your descendants will bless the whole world. I'm going to bless the whole world through you. Talk about a big dream. Not a lot of specifics, but a huge dream. And so Abraham, in different times before his name's changed, you may see Abram. I'm just going to say Abraham for the sake of simplicity. But he takes this dream, he receives it, and then a while later, God has another conversation with him. And nothing had happened, by the way. Nothing had happened in between that time, chapter 12, and this time, chapter 15. It looked like there was absolutely no progress on the dream. So God shows up again and makes a covenant with Abraham, and they have a conversation where God starts out by saying, Abraham, I am your shield, your very great reward. Now that's a side note, but I think it's one of the most powerful verses in the whole story. I am your shield, I am your protector, your very great reward. Which is nice, and Abraham kind of, okay, but Lord, there's a little problem here in the dream, and this is where we pick up in the conversation that we have here. And Abram said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the sky, count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And Abram believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Isn't that like what you and I do oftentimes? If we get a glimpse of what God wants to do, we see the immediate challenge ahead of us and think, there's no way. Look, I don't even have kids. We can't have kids. I like the idea of a great nation and all these descendants. You may have neglected the fact that we are not able to have children. That seems like a pretty important first step, God. Which we do so naturally when something is ahead and it seems like God has laid a huge promise, a huge potential before us, and then right at our very feet is the first unstoppable obstacle. We can't get past this one. Sometimes we forget who we're talking to, so God said, I want to give you a visual reminder. Abram, come here for a minute. Step out of your tent. Look around. Who made all this? I just want to show a brief visual reminder that will give us that sense of God's potential. Grander scale. Grander scale. A writer in a ministry magazine says, any dream God put in your heart will be much bigger than you. Most children start out with big dreams of being a Major League Baseball player or the first woman president of the United States, but people and circumstances whittle those dreams down to size. We reach adulthood and we voluntarily trim our dreams to manageable proportions so we won't be disappointed. The first test you can apply to your dream is this: is it too big for me to fulfill without God's help? Second hero of the Old Testament is Moses, and as the verse shows, I want to give you a little background to Moses' story in the context that we come here. Moses, if you're familiar with this will sound like music to your ears. You know this story. Moses saw a burning bush, which was the point at which God spoke to him and gave him a calling, and the calling was much bigger than what he had ever imagined. He would be God's instrument to lead hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of his people out of oppression and slavery as they were slaves in Egypt, and move them into the land that God promised Abraham a long time ago. So Moses goes through the process of delivering the people, moving them out of the land of Egypt, moving them toward the land of Canaan, the land that God wanted them to settle in. And if you've read the story, there's a little bit of transpire process to this. They don't just kind of transplant from Egypt to Canaan. There's some things that happen along the way. And in Deuteronomy, Moses is recounting this whole story. He's telling the Israelites, he's telling them about the process. And he's telling them how they were about to take Canaan. They were about to go in with their army and challenge the groups that were there. And God had told them to go, and the people shrunk in fear and instead kind of ran away. Well, then they realized, we shouldn't have done that. So then they said, okay, let's do it. Let's go. Muster up some courage. And God said, no, stop. They went and got defeated. And so then were sent into a long period of nomadic lifestyle. They did not settle in the land that was really prosperous. They wandered in more of a wilderness desert type of land setting. No food, no resources. They had to trust God daily for what they needed. So as Moses is recounting this long story and telling them what had happened, in verse 14, he makes this little statement: 38 years passed from the time we left Kadesh Barnea until we crossed the Zered Valley. By then, the entire generation of fighting men had perished from the camp as the Lord had sworn to them. 38 years. I want to show you the map. So if you can see up in the corner, the green, where the green line ends, that's Kadesh Barnea. Up a little bit more to the right-hand side is the Zered River and the Zered Valley. About 100 miles. Took them 38 years. That's like less than 3 miles a year. Can you imagine starting out from here to travel to Fort Wayne and it taking you 38 years? Some of you would never see Fort Wayne. Sorry to say, but you just don't got 38 years left in you. The journey would never happen. And you start thinking, man, that's not that far. Moses, bite the bullet and buy a GPS. Like you could cut some, the people would donate. Believe me, you would have a pretty good offering if we're going to say, okay, we need to take up a collection, we need a GPS. Okay, let's save 37 and a half years and just go ahead and get to where we're going. But then you realize they actually had a really good GPS. God was guiding them visually. God was literally by vision of, they could see the smoke of God or the fire of God by night. So they knew exactly when to move and when to stop, and they would follow God's lead really precisely. So then you start saying, God, why did it take so long? to get 100 miles. This is not about the geographical travel. It was about the character distance. Sometimes with God, the winding road is the shortest path. He didn't just want to get the people to a better place. He wanted to get better people to a better place. Have you ever had a thing in your life that you really wanted to accomplish? Maybe you even felt like God was wanting you to do, but it just took so long. There was a longer timeline than you imagined. That's number 2. There was a longer timeline than you imagined, and as you're going through the process, you think, man, this seems like it could just sort of snap together, but it's taking forever. And sometimes you begin to doubt the entire journey. You say, why did we set out in the first place? Why did I take this step? Am I even going in the right direction? And it seems like it's taking way too long. Step back for a moment and ask yourself, what is God after in me? What is he doing in me on this journey? For the Israelites, there was a climate of fear. He had to let that fear die out. There was a history of cowardice. He had to let another generation come and overwhelm it with a history of courage, or at least frustration. We're not going to back down because I don't want to go through another 38 years in the wilderness. Like, we're just going to obey the Lord, I guess. You may have heard the lesson of the Chinese bamboo tree. If you plant a bamboo tree, which I've never done, if you plant a bamboo tree and plant the seed in the ground in fertile soil, you water it day after day and make sure it's nourished. And for the entire year, as you water it day after day, you look and nothing happens. Nothing is coming up from the ground. Nothing is showing visibly at all. So the next year you come back, water it day after day. Again, nothing is happening. You cannot see growth. It's not even busting past the soil. Year number 3, water day after day. Water day after day. Make sure it has fertilized. Year number 4, water. Nothing happens. No breakthrough. You're looking and thinking, is this the right spot? It's been a few years. Is this actually where I planted the thing? Did something eat the seed? Is this bad soil? Where did it go? Year 5. When growing season happens, that bamboo in about 60 days grows up to 80 feet. It's a 7-story building in 2 months. It grows at rates that can be over a foot an hour at the peak times of growth. And you look at what was happening all of those first years and think, man, it wasn't growing up, it was growing down. The roots were developing. They were growing into the places to get nourishment. They were growing strong because if they had not grown a really developed root system, it would never have sustained the growth. That kind of growth would have toppled the tree in a day. And you look at other people and you think, wow, God is blessing their life. Their business is taking off. Their church is flourishing. It just looks like poof, they've shot up. And we never hear the story of the year after year after year of God's deep character growth in those people, in those churches, in those leaders, in those families, where it looks like not much is happening, but God takes us through a process of developing us on a much longer timeline than we realize. I think some of us thought that the Paul Borden consultation would be an immediate fruit bearer. We'll do this thing, we'll do what some people say we need to do, we'll make hard decisions, and then poof. Longer timeline. Grander scale, longer timeline. Joshua shows us greater resources. here's the verse from Joshua. Now, I want to remind you that our theme verse for this last year, and this is actually the last week of that verse being our theme verse, has been Joshua 1:9. Be strong and courageous. Don't be terrified. Don't be discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you. Joshua got that encouragement from God early on because he was going to need it. There was a lot of battling to be done. There was a lot of fight ahead to fulfill God's promise. One of those particular battles was where they had to travel. The men, Joshua's fighting men, got call from a distant neighbor and said, we need you to come and help. We're being attacked. So Joshua rallied the men immediately. They marched all night, 20 miles, all night. See, if Moses had that kind of traction, they would have got there really quick. They marched all night in the dark with some pretty steep grade across 20 miles of distance to get to where the fighting was, and then they fought all day, and they were winning. But the enemy started to scatter, and it started to appear that they were going to run out of time, because if darkness fell, the enemy would be able to hide under the cover of darkness and escape and regroup. So Joshua prays this prayer, and he says, Lord, give us more time. Make the sun stand still. And this is where we pick up in this verse in Joshua chapter 10. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There's never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. Now, on a textual aside, this is an amazing passage, and Christian scholars interpret it different ways. So you've got a range of possibilities here. Some say he was actually quoting a poem, and it wasn't really meant to be literal sun standing still, but God gave them more time. Some say that God actually stopped the movement of the planet and abetted all the catastrophe that would happen and prevented it. Some say God actually slowed the motion of the planet so the day lasted longer. However you choose to interpret that, the point is at the end, it's clear the Lord was fighting for Israel. I tend to default toward actually believing those miracles happened, even if I don't understand how the science works. But as God gave them more time, we look at this story and think, can you imagine walking with armor, with weapons, 20 miles uphill at night, and then fighting all day, and then saying, well, we need more time to fight, and then fighting all day again? I mean, just think of the physical nature of that day. It's impossible, or at least improbable. And it shows us that God was at work here, because when God has called us to do something, when we have a God-given vision, when we're following the dream that the Lord put in, what we're doing, the things that he wants us to do, he can actually enhance our energy and our time. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? But maybe you've experienced it. I've experienced it. You get to a point where you're like, I know this is what I need to be doing. It's my responsibility. I have to be doing it. But don't you always feel like you're running out of time? You just don't have enough time to get all that stuff done, especially adding in good stuff for church or other people. It's like, man, I just don't have enough time. I run out of energy by the time the workday is over. There have been a number of times where I look at the day ahead and think, there is no way I can get all this stuff. I need to get it done. I just can't. There's no way I can do it. And I will stop. On good days, I will stop and pull back and say, God, I need to start this with you, because if I just chase it, even if I get it done, it's going to be a wasted day. And I will stop and I will center myself in God, and somehow on those days, you ever had that happen? Try it sometime. When you're sure the time and energy doesn't stack up, just say, God, if you want me to do this, I'm going to trust that you will provide extra time and energy. See if he does. What is the dream? What is the dream that God has put in your heart that is beyond you? For me, it's this idea of 52,000 people in our county who are nuns, N-O-N-E, not N-U-N, nuns, no church affiliation. It's a crazy number. And if God moves, being the kind of place where he could move us, we could be a part of his love reaching them. What is the dream that God has put in your heart or for our church? Are you resisting it? want to close with this diagram, which may give us a little bit of a picture. Can you see this okay? This is our comfort zone. This is where life is fairly under our control. And usually what we do is we try to bring all of life into our comfort zone. And sometimes we try to extend our comfort zone by getting better at certain skills or certain arenas that we are not currently good at. But we like life in our comfort zone. It's fairly predictable. It's fairly in control. It's natural human tendency. This is the risk zone. This is where, see, a little bit of our comforts are still there, but we've had to leave some behind. It's not all risk. We haven't abandoned all of our comforts. But the whole horizon in front of us is clearly uncomfortable, unknown, beyond our reach, and out of our control. This is where God calls us to take steps of faith. Another name for the risk zone could be the faith zone. And then there's reckless. Reckless is taking steps in the wrong direction, not supported by God's vision, and almost, if this is the faith zone, this would be a foolish zone. I want to give you an illustration of these three zones. Comfort zone is when you get in your car that you've been driving for many years, drive to the grocery store, pick up some groceries, and drive back. That drive you've done 100 times, probably 100 times a year. You're pretty familiar with that. That's your comfort zone. The risk zone is when you just turned 16, just got your license, and your dad hands you the keys and says, okay, you're on your own. And you get in the car for the first time ever by yourself. You've never driven by yourself before, and you take off on the highway, and all of a sudden, there's all kinds of variables you can't control. There's other cars. The deer could run out and hit you. The car could have a mechanical problem. All of a sudden, a little bit of it's familiar, some of it's some stuff you've done before, but the risk just blows wide open. But you know it's a risk you need to take. It's time. You've trained, you prepared. This is the next step, and it's going to help you grow because you're stepping out of your comfort. It's also another version of that risk zone would be when you're on the other end of life and the other end of your driving career, and you know you don't have the eyesight anymore to drive. And people around you have hinted at it's time to give up your keys. You're not safe on the road anymore. And you take the risk of turning them back over. Say, well, now there's all kinds of things I can't control. I can't go where I want to anymore. I have to rely on other people. How am I going to get things done? What's life going to look like if I don't have that mobility? The reckless zone would be giving your keys to your 6-year-old and saying, go have fun. 6-year-olds should not be driving alone. You shouldn't be driving at all. The reckless zone is where you know that your eyesight is very, very poor, and you know you're endangering other people when you get in the car, but you refuse to give up the keys. God calls us. He moves us out of here. I heard of a church. Story of a church plan. It hadn't been around for very long. This was a while ago. They had a female pastor before having a female pastor was really that common. And the church had, attendance had gone up and down, and it got to where it was about less than a dozen people, and the powers that be were going to close it down. Say this isn't viable anymore. We're going to liquidate all the assets and just start, do something else. But the pastor of that church believed that God had something more for that church and said, no, please give us more time. So through negotiating with the larger church body, she said she bought him more time. Give us more time, that God has more for us to do here. And so that pastor rallied the less than a dozen people, and she went door to door, knocking on doors, stepped out of her comfort zone. The whole church took a risk, door to door, recruiting children to come and be a part of the ministry. And that church eventually grew to a viable size and eventually became one of the most influential churches in its community for a period of time, winning hundreds of people to the Lord. That was 1934. The name of that pastor was Reverend Ora Irvine. That church was Warsaw Wesleyan Church. I'm not going to ask you to step out of your comfort zone today. I'm just going to ask you if you would be willing to. Thomas is going to play for just a moment. And as he plays, I'd like to ask you to have the conversation with God. Not asking you to do anything. Just asking if you would be willing to.
Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you.
Would you stand with me? Hold fast to dreams, for if you do, the power of God will shine through you. Hold fast to dreams, for if you try, you will mount up on wings like an eagle and fly. May the love of God, the peace of Jesus Christ, and the power and fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you as you go. You are sent.